The Gauteng High Court in Pretoria will today hear a legal bid to review the analogue switch-off set for the end of the month. The applicants argue that if the decision to set the switch-off deadline to the 31st of March 2025 is not reviewed and set aside, it will sever millions of South Africans' access to television. Let's cross to Canny Maphanga, SABC news reporter, for more on that story. Canny, good morning to you. Let me hand it over to you.
Well, good morning to you, Leanne, and to the viewers at home. A very important case affecting millions of South African viewers is heading to the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. Essentially, what we are dealing with here is the issue of migration from the analogue signal to broadcasting digitally. Now, we know as far back as 2011, we've been dealing with these extensions being made by the government with regards to this issue. Essentially, now what brings us to the High Court is that there is another application following the Constitutional Court's decision that the analogue switch-off deadline, or the decision rather, must mitigate the adverse impacts that would follow if there is widespread termination of access to television for millions of South Africans that depend on it for access to information. So, of course, that hasn't happened because we know that the set-top boxes that have been rolled out, Leanne, to South Africans is not sufficient or does not meet the demand and the request for all the millions of South Africans that should have it and are registered to have those set-top boxes. So ETV, together with Media Monitoring Africa and SOS, have brought this application to the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, seeking to review and set aside that decision to make the 31st of March 2025 the deadline, and of course are asking the court to refer it back to the minister for a new decision. They are arguing that there wasn't a rational process, arguing that they weren't consulted in this particular decision, arguing that millions of South Africans come the 1st of April will not have access to television, and that is in breach with government's promise when they started this migration promise, or rather process, that they would not leave any South African behind. Of course, it also has quite an impact for the SABC, that is the public broadcaster. Although we're not an applicant in this matter, we are listed as one of the respondents. We have seen the SABC Group CEO Nomsa Chabedi explain that the SABC as a public broadcaster, of course, exercises its mandate for these millions of South Africans that rely on this free-to-air television in order to get that information. Of course, if we're looking at just over 4 million South Africans that will be cut off come the 1st of April, if this deadline is allowed to proceed come the 31st of March, it not only affects their right to access to television, but of course affects the SABC's overarching ability to sustain itself as the public broadcaster and continue to fulfill its mandate, because the SABC is self-funded, and of course it relies on those numbers and those viewers in order to attract that advertising revenue. So it's a critical case for members of the public in their rights to access to television, and of course for the public broadcaster and its important role in South Africa's democracy. It does affect the sustainability because it risks that ability for this self-funded company to be able to generate that revenue if it loses all those viewers on the 31st of March 2025. So we expect that hearing to begin at 10 a.m. this morning in the Gauteng High Court in Pretoria. It is a special allocation, so it is being dealt with as a matter of urgency. As that deadline looms, we'll hear arguments and submissions from ETV together with Media Monitoring Africa and SAS, explaining why this deadline needs to be halted until government meets that demand of not leaving anyone behind, and you mitigate that adverse impact of switching off, or rather terminating widespread television access to millions of South Africans who rely on it. Over to you in studio.
All right, Canny, thank you very much, giving us a great concise background on there and what is at stake here for millions of South Africans if that switch does go ahead. So it's an interesting case to keep watching on there. Canny Maphanga is on that story.